You can't deny history just because you don't like what it says. It's history. But the biggest thing in our winning hand is that we've got time. We are going to outlive the truth, and all of us are going to outlive these forces of hatred. So, with truth, time, evidence, and history on our side, my biggest fear is that we will blow this winning hand with the call out culture, that will turn on each other instead of to each other and not play a winning hand the way it should be played.
Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to In the Meanwhile. I am Marcus Harrison Green.
And I'm Nora Kenworthy, and we are all currently witnessing what historians may one day classify as a cascading institutional sycophancy event, but which the rest of us have to call Tuesday.
Oh boy, that is right, folks. The crybaby in chief is having a rough week, and the centerpiece of his suffering is that no one wants to attend his big 250th birthday celebration slash White House desecration party. Nearly every musical act has quietly backed out, some not so quietly, citing reasons like needing to wash their hair, clip their toenails, the potential for a debilitating headache, or needing to check their contracts for a treason clause.
Yeah, yeah. You know it's bad when even Milli Vanilli won't be showing up.
I I did not realize they were
Like,
still.
first of all, the gall
Yeah.
to put them on a list, right? Like For by the way, America's 250th birthday, like, this is what we've got.
Nothing says Milli
Um,
Vanilli, and Vanilla
yeah.
Ice, I believe, is
Oh
also
my god, I
on the billing
know.
for a bit.
But my favorite detail and, there's been so much chaos around this event that I feel like this one's gotten buried, but my favorite detail is that the recruiting agent for the event is named, and I wish this were a joke,
Oh my
Jeffrey
god.
Epstein.
This is not
And
an AI ruse or anything. This is
no, and
literally.
it's not that
Jeez.
Jeffrey Epstein, but someone in the administration, like, went over that paperwork and was like, "Well, I don't see an issue here," which honestly tracks.
It very much does, Nora, it very much does. So now Trump is threatening to cancel the event, which is honestly a real bummer because he and Pete Hegseth, or Pete Kegsbreth, as a
Yes.
former guest of ours, has called him. We're really looking forward to watching half-naked dudes wrestle in the summer DC heat while only the most physically fit service members looked on in uniform for patriotism, quote unquote.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, which is definitely not, under any circumstances, not even a little bit, gay, right? Even though it's happening in Pride Month, this is simply 2 men who love America, Marcus, watching other men who also love America in a very specific physical way in June.
Yeah, you add some drag queens and a frozen rosé station, and you've actually got something. Like, move it to Fire Island, and I would indeed buy a ticket, Nora, I gotta
It would
say.
definitely spice up the event a bit.
I'm thinking, could they just not why don't they just come out at this point? Like, I
I
mean, it is
know.
like they're living down to the stereotype of the closeted, conservative who just, does everything except come out. But anyway, moving
No,
on.
I know. Um, Trump this week, I think, was also dumped by his own Justice Department, which is really saying
Yes.
something. Todd Blanche, acting attorney general, said they would not be creating his $1.8 billion Republican crybaby compensation fund. Um, Instead, the blanket immunity protections are going to only go to Trump, not his January 6th democracy looting friends.
Jeez. Well, apparently the pardons, the qualified immunity, and the cushy government appointments are going to have to be enough for them.
Mhm.
This week, the Washington Post, yes, it does still do some decent reporting here and there, despite
Sometimes.
its owner. Despite its owner. Anyway, they reported that Elias Irizarry, a convicted January 6th rioter who was only 19 at the time of the riot, has now been hired by the Trump administration to a highly classified post in the Pentagon that manages irregular warfare and counterterrorism efforts. Yeah, I guess his participation in actual terrorism counted as relevant field experience. I don't understand that one at all, Nora. But
Has he even had time to graduate college, Marcus?
I
Between the, like, rioting and the going to jail, right? Like, I
I mean, let's be honest, I don't think he was on the dean's list. I'll just say
um,
that.
this is a very efficient pipeline, Marcus. I mean, riot to resume in under 5 years. We gotta put him on a 30 under 30 list or something.
Very true.
Um, it has truly been a banner week for unqualified sycophants in the Trump administration. This week, also, Trump named one of my favorite Nepo babies, Bill Pulte, acting director of national intelligence. Pulte, if folks remember, is basically Trump's lapdog who
Oh my
used his
God.
previous position at the Federal Housing Financing Agency to go after Trump's enemies by investigating their mortgage documents, which he is now being investigated for, among other suspected crimes.
Mm. Of course, he has no security or intelligence experience whatsoever, but he is, and I truly wish this were a work of fiction, a key promoter of conspiracy theories related to Bed, Bath, and Beyond. Um, okay, well, I'm sorry, but it's like we're being governed by Mad Libs, like Succession Edition at this point. I mean,
The
God,
sitcom, I mean, we
God,
say this all the time, but the sitcom is really writing itself these days, Marcus. Only we're the
very true.
poor fools who are living it as reality.
My
Um,
God.
Also this week, reports came out that the federal agency responsible for containing invasive species in the United States has itself been invaded by bedbugs. It is so bad that employees are being sent home on leave
God.
because the infestation cannot be controlled.
Oh my lord. Um, this metaphor, as you said, Nora, it's writing itself, and I refuse to touch it though. I refuse to
Yeah,
touch it. But in all seriousness, are the bed bugs okay? Like they're feasting on some seriously toxic humans. My God. So, maybe this isn't all bad. I don't know.
it does make me wonder if this clown show will simply, like, implode of its own incompetence. I mean,
I, I
the
mean,
Trump dream.
not soon enough, Nora. Not soon enough. I will say the only thing this administration is good at, though, is making sure they get to walk away unscathed. But while the game is rigged, the odds are definitely in our favor. At least that's what I choose to believe.
Yes.
This should not be a hard case to make the voters. Corruption, self-dealing, a Pentagon run by January 6th tourist, and a Bed Bath and Beyond truther. Democrats, look, I'm an independent lefty, but you have the material. Okay. You just do not do what you typically do. And you take you take defeat from the draws of victory. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Because the question is definitely, are they going to use it or spend the next 18 months arguing about who gets to hold the microphone?
Yes, and instead, what we're seeing in the run up to the midterms is a ton of infighting between Democrats. And that, in some ways, is a perfect segue to what today's episode is about. Because the test for the left right now really isn't whether we're right, it's whether we can bring people with us.
Mm,
Charles Douglas III, organizer of Common Power, has said it before on the show, and it bears repeating. The goal isn't purity, the goal is power. And you don't get
yes.
power by shrinking the room.
Yeah. Like, what do they say? Like, politics is a choice, not a marriage, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyhow,
Thank
in
God.
life, yes, my God, yeah, there was just, but you talk about the divorce rate on that one. Anyhow, but in light of all of that, we couldn't be more honored and grateful to have Loretta Ross with us on the podcast this week to talk about the dangers of call out culture in progressive circles and how we can win through a politics of compassion, grace, and calling in.
And Marcus, I have a particularly large case of Romo, which is what I call regret of missing out. For this episode, I sadly missed this incredible conversation, but I'm so glad that I can have it on replay on my phone because Professor Ross truly offers us like a
Yeah.
lifetime's worth of hard earned wisdom about movement building, organizing against hate, and what it truly takes to win without losing our humanity and our collective souls.
Absolutely, folks. Please, I mean, if you've been with us like this long, so absolutely do not skip this episode.
This is a
And
gem.
yes, share it with as many people as you possibly can. With that, let me go ahead and get into Professor Ross's wonderful bio, because Professor Ross is an activist, professor, and public intellectual, In her 5 decades in the human rights movement, she's deprogrammed white supremacists, taught convicted rapists the principles of feminism, and co organized the second largest march in Washington, the March for Women's Lives in 2004, surpassed only by the 2017 Women's March. As the founder of the National Center for Human Rights Education and a co founder of the Sister Song Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective, she has been a founder of the reproductive justice movement. Her many accolades and honors include a 2022 MacArthur Fellowship and a 2024 induction into the National Women's Hall of Fame. Today, Professor Ross is an associate professor at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, and she's here today to talk with us about her new book, Calling In: How to Start Making Change with Those You'd Rather Cancel. I know you said to call you Loretta, but I will start off by calling you Professor Ross at first. Professor Ross, it is such an honor to have you here with us. I know many of our listeners are huge fans of yours. I'm certainly a huge fan, and I just thank you for being here today.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Yes. So I want to start off by saying, you have said before that how we do the work, meaning, how we are going about trying to improve our lot in life, if you will, a collective lot in life and the betterment of
Hmm.
our society. You say how we do the work uh, is just as important to you as the work itself. So I want to ask you, what changed in your understanding of power and movement building that led you to that sentiment? And do you think some of our younger activists are being given enough models for what sustainable struggle actually looks like?
Well, I know when I first started doing social justice activism, I started out as a survivor, a very angry survivor of childhood sexual abuse and rape. And I was never able to hold the people who had violated me accountable. So I kind of took it out on a lot of other people, particularly the people with whom I had to do social justice work with.
Mm,
I was very critical of how they did the work. I had these impossible to attain standards for what I thought principled struggle should look like, knowing privately I was failing my own standards, right? So
mm.
I was fronting, which is a 1970s word, that I was all that when inside I was a mess.
Mm,
And one of the reasons I wrote this book on calling in how to start making change with those you'd rather cancel was to offer the 50 years of lessons I'd learned about how you work for human rights without violating human rights, because that's a contradiction. One should not have to hurt people to prove you've been hurt.
right,
And
right.
so that's how I reimagined telling a different story, because it's not enough to have radical analyses of neoliberal capitalism and white supremacy and misogyny if you don't have the radical love practices to handle that knowledge responsibly and with
Mm,
compassion. I want my passion to be guided by compassion.
mm. Well,
And that's the purpose of my life right now.
well, I'll say from your mouth to the goddess's ears. I, no, I do want to follow up just by asking you that additionally in your work, and as you kind of alluded to, you do not separate accountability from humanity. And I want to ask you, as we are living through a very, we're living through a period that sort of punitive remuneration is sort of the name of the game. I want to ask you, how do you think we go about rebuilding a belief that transformation is possible without abandoning accountability?
Well, first of all, we have to appreciate the complexity of every human being. Every human being has good sides, bad sides, stuff that they're proud of, stuff they're ashamed of. We all make mistakes. And so if we walk through life expecting people to be perfect, to know everything that they're supposed to know at the time you think they should know it, then we're going to be constantly disappointed by reality and setting ourselves up for not having our expectations met because they're false expectations to begin with. And so I want to encourage people to really appreciate and delight in how complicated people are. And we want others to appreciate how complicated we are too. And so for me, the whole calling in practice is about learning how to enjoy the complexity of humanity rather than see it as a problem. Because we've all been through something different, and because we have different lived experiences, we tend to think differently about a lot of different things. I know I'm working that word different a lot, but I'm kind of tired of the word diversity. but but that's what I mean. I mean, even siblings coming from the same family think differently about things. And so walking through the world thinking that people are supposed to perfectly align with how you think about something is just a false expectation, because even as close as they are to you, they're going to think slightly different about how you respond to white supremacy or how you respond to misogyny or classism or all these other isms that we battle. And that difference is not actually a problem. It is a source of strength, because when you bring many different perspectives to a problem, then you allow yourself to choose the best of the bunch. But if you only bring one perspective to a problem, you might settle for the lowest common denominator, which may not have been the best solution.
Professor Ross. Like I wish you could just speak to any and everybody on Nextdoor and on social media, because I've seen it even this past weekend where people who are neighbors, like legitimately live right next door to each other, are up in arms about things like bike lanes and sidewalks or whatever in their neighborhood. And you are somebody who has worked with everyone from survivors of violence to former white supremacists. And so, what have you learned about what actually causes people to change? Is it arguments? Is it shame? Is it love? Is it proximity? Is it loss? What is that sort of secret sauce, if you will?
Well, I think it's some combination of all of the above, depending on the situation and who you're addressing.
Mm.
I have never deprogrammed a white supremacist who didn't start their own epiphany first. In other
Mm.
words, they had to want to change for me to then help them with that change. But I
I
never
see.
went inside the Klan and flipped anybody. I'm not sure if that's possible. People do claim that it works and they do that, but
Mm.
I'm not disputing that it can be done. I'm saying that we would all share the same methodology, and that is to humanize yourself to them and let
Mm.
them humanize themselves to you. For example, I live in the South, I live in Georgia,
Mm.
and grits is my love language in the South. I can talk grits to any Southerner, whether it's sugar, salt, butter, pepper, with with shrimp or not. I
Oh.
mean, when you start off with that human to human connection, it's amazing how people with extremely different points of view can break bread together and find common ground. But
Mm.
it doesn't happen if you spend your time telling somebody how wrong they are and how right
Right.
you are, because what you've done is humiliate them. You made them
Mm.
believe that they're not a confident adult able to make decisions for themselves. You're belittling them.
Mm.
And I really get impatient when people weaponize their knowledge against others. I mean, only 6% of the world's population even gets to go to college.
Wow.
And so we're a privileged set, and we should not be putting down the 94% because of what we learn in college. It should be
Hmm.
enabling us to have the skills to communicate with them,
Right.
to to take their suffering seriously, to understand their point of view, not to put them down for not having our privileges. No more than we want a white person putting down a black person for not having white privilege. I mean, that's not how it's supposed to work.
Right. Right. Now, you know we're from the Northwest, so I have to ask you, are those grits organic though? Yes.
I don't know because there's a whole debate between stone ground grits and machine ground grits and organic grits and all of that. I don't care. As long as they're not too soupy, I'll eat them, but I don't like soupy grits. If I gotta use a spoon, you messed up the grits.
fair, fair enough. Fair enough. Now, now, Professor, in your book, you say that calling in is not about niceness, but it is about strategy. Can I ask you to unpack that distinction? Because I know that there definitely I've heard the argument that all calling in is just, you're trying to sort of pacify somebody or polish off their rough edges. Um, and then we need to be more strident, if you will, when it comes to social change. Because I think, it just seems that unfortunately there are a lot of people who hear compassion and they assume it's synonymous with surrender or acceptance. And I do think that that's a falsehood.
Well, I don't hesitate to use call outs. I mean,
Okay.
I call out racists, I call out fascists, I call out people who are intentionally cruel, because
Right.
those are the people that I don't think I'm going to spend any energy in trying to redeem them.
Mm,
But and so I don't take calling out off the table.
right.
I'm just saying that we overuse it when we should be trying to build something together rather than tear something down.
Mm,
My worldview is guided by what I call the spheres of influence. Uh, it's kind of how you organize a million people, so to speak.
mhm,
The inner circle of the sphere is what I call the 90 percenters. These are the people with whom I share such a common political perspective that when I say the word neoliberal capitalism, I don't have to define that for them.
right.
When I say heteropatriarchy, they know exactly what I'm talking about
Mm,
because we've been educated and trained to know the leftist buzzwords like that.
right.
And our problem as 90 percenters is that we're putting entirely too much energy into trying to turn the 90 percenters into 100 percenters. So if
Mhm,
I work on climate change and I work on it in this way, then you must work on it the same way I think you should work on it. Or if I work on reproductive justice, then you need to work on abortion the same way I need to work on it. That kind of
mm,
thing. When instead, that's not desirable or even achievable.
hmm,
Instead, we need to recognize that we're surrounded by the 75 percenters.
mm,
These are people who largely share our worldview that something's wrong with the world, but they are actually repelled by our heteropatriarchal buzzwords because they may not have had the privilege of
right.
getting the education that allows you to understand those kinds of terms. And their civic engagement may be more limited than ours because I'm addicted to watching Rachel Maddow, and they read the news headlines and they said, "Oh, I can't take any more of that," and they go on and live their lives. But at the same time, they're of service to their community. So they'll start the local food bank or go volunteer at it or
Mm,
start the local Girl Scouts or do something at their churches or something like that because they want to be of benefit and service to humanity. They just can't stand our addiction to the news, the
mm.
bad news kind of stuff. They want to just live a life that looks at the headlines and say, yep, bad as I thought it was. Let me get back to the supermarket kind of
Right.
thing.
Let me check in and check out real quick.
Right. But outside of the 75 percenters are the 50 percenters.
Mm,
And I call them that because they can go to the left or to the right, depending on who they trust. And my parents were the perfect 50 percenters because my mom was Southern evangelical Christian.
Hmm.
raised up to believe that Jesus was the answer to everything. And my father was an immigrant from Jamaica who lied about his age at 16 so he could join the army. And he was
Mm.
hyper patriotic and a member of the National Rifle Association. So, by
Right.
many measures, my parents would have been read as conservative. But
Right.
at the same time, here's a military sergeant with 8 kids and a wife and stuff. But my mom had to start a Girl Scout troop for me in the 1950s because we weren't allowed to be in the white Girl Scout troops.
Mm.
And one of the activities we had to do to get our badges was to prepare food for homeless people at her church. And so the way I would explain my work today to a 50%er like my mom, I would say, hey, mom, you feed the hungry. And I
Right.
just ask why they're hungry in the first place.
Mm.
I am living out your values, mom, but in a different way. So I'm not going to bombard her with my 90% language about
Right.
neoliberal capitalism and the brokenness of the social contract and that kind of thing. Why would I humiliate my own mother that way?
Mm.
Showing her the knowledge she doesn't have when I can speak directly to her heart. And that's what you do with 50 percenters. You ignore those top level things that are your buzzwords and their buzzwords, and you go directly to their hearts.
Mm.
Now, outside of the 50 percenters or the 25 percenters, we share so little worldview with the 25 percenters that I call them basically the MAGA base, the people who are not going to ever think Trump did anything wrong. And we could even use the same words and mean something totally different by them. I would say the word freedom means freedom from oppression, and their definition of freedom is the right not to wear a mask during a pandemic.
Mm.
Same word, totally different worldviews using that word. And then
Right.
outside of the 25 percenters are the actual fascists, the neo Nazis, the Proud Boys, the Boogaloo Boys, all of those guys that are proud to be hateful, basically. And so
Mm.
our calling in strategy is for the 90% to reach the 75s, and the 75s to reach the 50s, the 50s to reach the 25s, and maybe there's a glimmer of hope that the 25s can reach the zeros. But our mistake that we most commonly make is from our 90% perch, we want to flip the zeros and the 25s. And that ain't happening
Mm.
because we don't share enough common worldview to be intelligible to each other. So I say we need to be strategic. So I generally call out the zeros and I
Right.
will call out the 25s if they show a reluctance to change, to
Mm.
accept new information. If they
Right.
are bullying people or cherry picking their facts or gaslighting me and others, I will call them out. But if you're a 50%er and above, I'm going to work my best to call you in because if I consider myself an experienced community organizer, it should be reflected in my ability to work with all of those levels, not just
Mm.
the level that I'm most comfortable in.
Professor, I have to say there's a there's this meme in hip hop where it's would you rather have dinner with Jay-Z or take, $500,000 because, because supposedly an interview with him would be worth more than, $500,000 but unfortunately with some of his more recent interviews people are like, "Nah, just take the money. Just take the money." And I got to say with you, Professor, if it's between 500K and an interview with you, I'm going to take the interview every day cuz
Oh, you're so
this is
sweet.
amazing.
You're so sweet. But I don't think most people are irredeemable.
Mm.
I mean, like I said, we're all complicated. We have our good sides, we have our bad sides, we have our good days, we have our bad days.
Right.
And so making snap judgments about people simply because they don't use the words you'd like them to use or wear the colors or clothes you'd like them to wear or listen to the music you think they should be. I mean, that is so shallow.
Right.
And you cannot be a change agent in the world if you're working from a shallow analysis of your fellow human beings.
I I have to ask you, is that is that a type of discipline though, right? In terms of ensuring that you're doing that, right? And that you're not meeting, because I would tell you, I've there are definitely plenty of times where, I'll see something online or on social media, and I'm sure I'm not alone. And people will want to respond and completely shut somebody down. And so is it sort of a discipline to kind of just have that level of pause, if you will, between reaction and response, and to say, you know what? This is a human being. I do not know what led them to say this or do this in this very moment. Let me be curious about this.
Well, the first person you have to call in is yourself.
Mm,
And it's not that hard because calling in yourself means to give yourself a pause. Don't blurt out the
mm,
first thing that occurs to you because that first thing that comes out of your mouth is usually your trauma speaking. So you
mm,
need to give
yeah,
yourself a minute for your integrity and your intelligence to catch up to your mouth. And by the way, this is not something that we don't practice routinely
mm,
because if you've ever had to parent a child or work for a toxic boss,
mm.
you know damn well you can't spew out the first thing that comes to your mouth unless you want your child in therapy for life or you want to get fired. We are
That's real.
used situationally to putting ourselves on pause and carefully selecting the next words that come out of our mouth. We
Mm,
just don't use that discipline when it comes to someone getting on our nerves, like in road rage or when somebody is mean to us when we're trying to get our driver's license and stuff like that. But that skill is available to you. You just
right.
have to use it more. Call yourself in before you call somebody else out. Ask yourself whether or not your response to that situation will produce the results that you want, because
Mm,
quite often it'll make it worse if you lead with anger, blaming, and shaming. It won't make it better. Who's going to listen carefully to someone who's already demonstrated that they're going to hurt you and blame you
mm,
and shame you? That's when
mm,
the hearing shuts out. And that's why it can be so frustrating when people try to use the call out culture and they don't get the response that they wanted. Well, like Maya Angelou says, people may forget what you said, but they'll
mm.
never forget how you made them feel.
That's
So
real.
if you made a person feel humiliated or less than or inadequate, why in the hell would they listen to anything else you've got to say? They're not, because that's just humanity. That's just how people are wired. You're not
Right.
going to make me feel bad and then say I'm going to listen to you unless you like being in a domestic violence situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Or masochism or something. Right.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And so calling in is a strategic choice. It's not just a niceness lesson. It's not just, oh, I'm going to let you get away with being racist, or I'm going to let you get away with being sexist. No, it's not about that at all. But if you want the person to change, then you have to model the behavior you want, not just say, oh, you need to do that. I mean, who needs more bosses in the world? I don't.
Right. Right.
You know, and I certainly don't expect it from my community group or my social justice organization or from my college even.
Mm,
But when you offer people, so for example, instead of saying, I can't believe you just said that, why not just say, it's an interesting thing that you said. I used to use that word, but I've since learned that it's not a cool thing. Can we
right.
have a conversation about what led me to change?
Mm,
You're
mm.
still holding them accountable for the words that they shouldn't have used, but you're not making them feel humiliated because they had a different learning curve than you did.
Right. And it takes just as much energy, right, to go with that approach as it does the other, right? Maybe even less so, right? Because you're not so
Even
fired
less
up.
because you're squandering your soul fire uselessly.
Mm.
I imagine you got plenty of it, but you burn out quickly when you can't command people to change.
Yeah. Yeah. Duly noted. I well, Well, I want to ask you, Professor. You've lived through multiple eras of activism in America. What what has you most worried about our current political moment, and what gives you genuine hope beyond slogans or optimism as performance?
Well, a little bit more of my background. In the 1990s, I was the only Black person and the only woman who ran an opposition research center. As a matter of fact, that's what
Mm,
brought me to the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, particularly Eastern Washington, Idaho, Montana, Colorado, Utah, chasing and researching hate groups. That was
mhm,
my job in the 1990s. And what I quickly realized about those groups, though it took me another 20 years to put it to words, was that the only thing that they have going for themselves are lies and violence.
uh,
They even have to lie to the people they're leading and threaten violence against the people that follow them. While on the other side, those of us who are fighting for human rights and truth and justice, we've got a winning hand because what we've got on our side is the truth.
mm,
No matter how they try to deny it or bury it or flood it with fake facts,
right.
we've got the evidence. Like the kids say, we've got the receipts. we know, we know what you're doing and why you're doing it, no matter how you just try to disguise your white supremacist ideology.
Right.
When you decide to fire everybody who's a ranking officer in the military who just happens to be Black,
Yeah,
we got the receipts.
right.
Moreover, we've got the history that you don't want those young white children to be taught.
Mhm,
But you can't deny history just because you don't like what it says. It's history. But the biggest thing in our winning hand is that we've got time.
mm,
We are going to
yes,
outlive the truth, and all of us are going to outlive these forces of hatred. So, with truth, time, evidence, and history on our side, my biggest fear is that we will blow this winning hand with the call out culture,
mm,
that will turn on each other instead of to each other
yeah,
and not play a winning hand the way it should be played. Because, for example, this is a hard one for people to hear. Remember how we like to indulge in app FAFO? You effed around and found out?
yes, I I do.
Right. Except that that is the most strategically stupid thing we can do.
Mm,
Because if people who are caught up in the cult have finally started to question things that they thought they were certain of, we should be there for them to help them, like Harriet Tubman led them free slaves out of the darkness, instead of saying, I told you so. Because what does that strategically achieve? It weakens our opponents. And there's
yes.
no logic I can figure out that makes me want to make my opponent stronger.
Mm,
I want to make them weaker. And the more I can peel off their soft underbelly, the weaker they are and stuff. So I'm not doing it to make myself feel good, and I'm doing it to make them feel good. I'm doing it because it's strategically vital to make fascists as weak as they can possibly be.
mm,
That's why I'm doing it. And if you don't understand how to do a proper threat assessment so that you're angry at the 75 percenters because they got your gender pronoun wrong, and you're
mhm,
not angry at the zeros that are trying to wipe you off the face of the earth, I need you to grow up in order to lead this movement. Don't assume
mm,
leadership when you do a poor threat assessment like that.
mm. You said nothing but the truth, as a as my grandmother would say. That that's it, Professor. Something you said kind of it sort of struck me in the sense that I do notice that right now it feels like there are a lot of people who experience disagreement as some sort of existential invalidation, if you will. And I know you've spoken about how many times our opinions have become, our identities, right? And so, how do you think we can go about recovering the ability to be wrong, evolving, and unfinished people again?
Well, I like bragging about my mistakes because they demonstrate my ownership of my authentic self. I don't have to front for people. I don't have to pretend to be all that. I don't have to be afraid of showing up imperfectly. I can just show up with joy and delight in being all the messed up ways I can be because I know there's great parts about me too.
Mm,
And I want to own all of that and teach people what a joy it is to not be afraid of your secrets. What a joy it is to not fear being exposed. What a joy it is to know that you can make a mistake like you fall off a bicycle and you get back on it and you can ride it again.
yeah.
That is such a wonderful place to arrive at in your life. And when people get to that inner peace like that, that's when you have such pleasure in both the big and the little things in life. And you can contain that within the same heart that has the sorrows of the world too.
Mm,
When you do human rights work, it is our job to look at the worst things that people do to each other. But we have to do that without losing our joy of life, our
right.
belief in human beings, our belief in the goodness of people, and the possibilities of every human being. Because if you sacrifice your inner joy in the struggle for human rights, you're going to do more damage than good.
Mm,
Because if you're still bleeding from your soul wounds and you haven't gotten any healing practices for that, whether you call somebody in or out, you're just going to bleed all over them.
right. Right.
Because that's how you're going to show up, hurting people, calling yourself doing the work. No, you're actually using the movement as your personal therapy space. And like my
Mm,
grandmother would say, go get some help.
right. Serious. Serious. Well, well, Professor, I want to. I brought up social media before, but I want to be more direct about social media. What are your opinions on social media? Because it does seem that these platforms reward cruelty, certainty, and public shaming in ways that make calling in just structurally difficult to do. Um, is there something we can do to change, how we engage with social media, or and if so, I mean, can we do it in a way? Can we change it in a way that it does actually help our movements as opposed to sometimes stalling them or hurting them?
Well, social media platforms take advantage of how human beings are wired because we react with more attention to bad news than good news.
Yes, yes, we do.
Or what did Mark Twain says? A lie will travel around the world in a heartbeat while the truth is still putting on his shoes. That kind of thing. And so we're kind of wired for that. And social media platforms take advantage of that. And so whenever a severe call out happens over social media and reaches 1 million clicks, Google just made a $600,000. And you can imagine them doing that every minute. So in many ways, we're like the unpaid interns of the social media platforms. We ain't making the money, they are.
Right, free black labor as usual, right?
Exactly. And so we can make the strategic decision not to be their free interns anymore. I mean, it just isn't even making financial sense.
Right,
But we also can use our compassion to think about how our call outs are landing on people. Those are human beings that we're excoriating over social media.
right.
And unless you want to be a jerk, don't be an accidental jerk. Why are you
Mm.
performing jerkdom, calling it social justice work? Because it's not. You're just being an asshole and using our movement as your excuse to be an asshole.
Right.
And people have died for what we're fighting for. And
Yes.
here you are pimping it so that you can make yourself feel good by putting somebody else down,
Mm,
so that you can virtue signal how woke you are. I mean, really,
mm.
get over yourself.
Yeah, but
So, for an experienced activist like me, I have to honestly say I'm somewhat cynical because when
mm,
someone comes into a space, whether it's in real life or on social media, and they cause more disruption than unity, I think two things about them, and maybe I shouldn't be so binary. I think
mm,
they're woefully naive and don't know what they're doing, or I think they're a plant by COINTELPRO and they're designed to disrupt us.
mm,
And neither of those are good looks.
not at all. Not at all.
So you may think you're, earning points by calling people out and posturing about how woke you are. Some of us are going to sit back and say, uh huh,
Mm,
is this person building movement or building ego?
right. Right. Well, h- on that topic, I do want to ask you what would you say to folks who may be being introspective in this moment and saying, I recognize that I've sort of brought my trauma, to to this movement, and I've traumatized other folks. Like, what would you say, to those folks in terms of how they go about maybe, maybe it is either stepping back or sort of addressing that trauma before they move forward. What I guess what would your analysis be to them?
Well, it's something I say to everybody starting in kindergarten. You can say what you mean, and you
Mm,
can mean what you say, but you don't have to say it mean. That's always a choice. And don't pretend that it isn't. If
mm,
you are chosen to use your trauma and weaponize it against somebody else, that's not honoring your trauma. That's exploiting it.
right.
That's not healing your trauma. That is using it to get away with stuff that simply is not acceptable. If you if you're working in a movement that's trying to end the reason you need help in the first place.
Mm,
That
yeah.
and it's no excuse. And I understand why people lead with their trauma, but I'm less likely to accept that that's the only choice that they have.
Right.
That is a choice. I mean, I've been raped by black men. It
Mm,
would be a choice if I went around forever hating black men,
mm,
even though I have residual trauma from that. But I
right.
chose not to do that. I chose not to believe that all black men were rapists. I had evidence of my five brothers and my father.
Mm,
Some people don't have that evidence I have, but still, it's a choice on how you heal from your trauma and choose not to use it to punish others because you've been hurt.
right. Right. Well, I want to wrap up with two questions for you, and thank you so much for being generous with your time today. Um, y- Unfortunately, my podcast partner can't be here, but I do want to make sure I get this question in, because you spent decades organizing around reproductive justice and human rights. And so I wanted to ask you, what lessons from Black feminist organizing do you think broader progressive movements still fail to understand?
Well, this isn't specifically from Black feminism, though I
Mm,
will say the thing that Black feminism has best taught me is that the best struggle is conducted collectively.
mm,
I've never, ever imagined that I was the only one necessary to do the work. So,
mm,
Black feminism certainly taught me collectivity, but that is overlaid on a struggle, on a lesson I learned from the civil rights struggle, because I had just left watching the film The 13th.
mm,
Uh, the film The 13th about neo slavery and what happened after the Civil War and how people who were incarcerated still were used as chain gang labor and stuff like that.
right.
And I was with this prison abolitionist named Deborah Small. And when I left the 13th, I was ready to go batter any white person I saw in that moment because
Mm,
that's how visceral my rage was about,
right.
the continuance of Jim Crow and all that had happened to my people.
Right.
And Deborah called me in because she said, Loretta, you need to stop. and ponder that you're not the entire chain of freedom, because the chain of freedom stretches back towards your ancestors and forward towards your descendants.
Mm.
All you have to do in this moment is make sure that the chain doesn't break at your link
Hmm.
through apathy, through cynicism, through misdirected anger, through hopelessness, despair, whatever. Don't excuse your responsibility for your link. Now, you can
Mhm.
choose not to protect your link, but don't deny that you have a choice.
Yeah.
And that has stuck with me forever. And there's no way I can't believe that the situation of Black folks is not getting better when my mother cleaned white folks' houses on her hands and knees while raising 8 kids. And I get to
Mm.
pontificate while sitting on my ass. you know, I get to say things to white people that would have gotten my parents lynched who were born in 1918 and 1922.
Right. Right.
And so I can't deny the privilege of an education, the privilege of the fact that the world has changed, has improved. There's still a lot of work to be done, but I'll never forget that I'm part of a chain of freedom
Mm.
going back from the ancestors or forward to my descendants. And I just want to be a good ancestor.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you definitely seem to be on the right path. I will wrap up with this question because I don't think it's any. I don't think it should come as a shock to anyone that there are so many people who are feeling just exhausted right now, whether that's politically, spiritually, physically, even just sort of worn down by um, sort of either the rapidity of bad news or just the direction of where our country is going. And so I want to ask you, what have you learned about the endurance of the human spirit, while fighting these systems that are all so often, seem so inhuman?
I've learned that you need a toggle switch where you turn your consciousness on and off. That's your sustainability strategy. Because if you stay on all the time, you will get burnt out in a heartbeat. Because
Mm.
you don't have the emotional bandwidth, the relational bandwidth, the cultural bandwidth, and most of all, the integrity bandwidth to constantly ingest all the horrible news of our society without it pulling your whole spirit down.
Yeah.
So you have to toggle that consciousness off. And sometimes you just go watch Barbie or Michael Jackson or whoever you got to watch without a critical analysis.
Right.
Just have fun. Well, for me, my fun is I play competitive pinochle,
Really?
which is kind of like whist on steroids or
Hmm.
spades on steroids. And I play it with the most cross political set of people in the world. I
Hmm.
mean, I've got people who are Trump supporters playing pinochle, like I got people who are very much on the other side. And I turn
Right.
that toggle switch off and I just have human fun with people.
Mm.
Or I love, because I was raised with 5 brothers, I like competitive bloody contact sports like football and basketball and boxing and stuff.
Mm.
So I'm not going to go to a boxing match and offer a feminist analysis. I'm going to turn that toggle switch off and have
Well,
that's the sustainability strategy. You got to party as hard as you work.
yes. Yes, you do. Well, with that, Professor, and again, I know you told me to call you Loretta. That said, you said earlier about people saying some things very, very mean, and I know that if I did not give a black woman her proper respect and her title, my mom would cuss me out. So I'm going to
That's all
continue to
right.
call you Professor
Well, you
Ross.
can call me Professor Ross. People call me Mama Ross. I don't care. I do prefer Loretta because I honor my mother every time I say the name she gave me.
Well, it is a very beautiful name, and so thank you so very much for being here today. Just it was a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and I very much enjoyed being able to speak with you.
Thanks for having me on your show.
Nora, I know that you definitely said that you had a bit of regret for missing out, and I gotta say I understand because that
Yeah.
was like such a just treasure trove of wisdom. And we said before in the in our intro for Dr. Ross that it was just like she just shared so much hard-earned wisdom. I mean, there was a point there where it was sort of like when I was talking to her, I was like, is this a real person? Like just in
Yes.
terms of her ability to navigate so much and to hold, so many of life's contradictions in terms of, her being able to do things such as, teach uh, people who had committed rape feminism, right? To deprogram white supremacists, right? And to walk into sort of these hazardous social environments and not just leave, I don't want to say unscathed, but I mean to leave them, much better and to leave them without, without herself losing her own humanity. I mean, ultimately this just goes back to the thesis of this podcast ultimately is like, how do we hold on to our humanity in very inhumane times? And I
Yep.
think, of all, and we've had some tremendous guests, and so I'm not at all trying to, um, stack rank anybody, but I will say, like, I think out of all of our guests, Professor Ross embodies that,
Yes.
um, like so much.
Well, and, like, also while being so real and so humble and so, like, self-assessing about what she's been through and how different people have shown up in movements, and
Mm,
there's, like, a real pragmatism to this wisdom as well that's, like I loved what she said about how we have a chance here, and we're gonna blow our chance if we keep fighting with each other, right? Like, we
yeah,
gotta figure out how to bring more people with us, and it's like that pragmatic solidarity building that, like, we all know we need to do it, but, like, the how of it is so hard, and she's just such an incredible person to learn it from.
absolutely, absolutely. That said, Nora, why don't we get into our joy for the week? Although I will say it was definitely a
I
joyous
was just gonna say,
conversation that that we
this
had
was
there.
joyful. This was so good. I am so glad we recorded this, and I truly mean it. I'm going to have this, like, on replay, in my heavy rotation for a while. It's a really incredible conversation.
Yeah.
But I guess my other piece of joy, this week is, I think I've, like, kind of been, like, a cheerleader for science on this podcast in the past, but, like, sometimes science just, like, takes my breath away with, like, how awesome it is. And that happened this week. There was, like, a boring academic conference of oncologists, cancer doctors, and at that conference, Dr. Brian Wolpin, was kind of giving, like, a pretty standard conference talk about, pancreatic cancer treatment,
Mm.
and then he showed this slide showing that they had actually managed to double the amount of time that people with pancreatic cancer are able to live with this new drug,
Oh, wow.
and for folks who don't already know this, pancreatic cancer has always been the sort of, like, untreatable cancer.
Right.
It has this kind of protein structure that's just, like, incredibly difficult to, like, get drugs to bind to, um, and they had figured out how to do it with this drug, and all of a sudden, there was, like, this spontaneous standing ovation for
Oh
him
my
of, like,
goodness.
these thousands of people in the room just, like, standing and clapping and continuing to clap. Um, and, like, it's such a dark time for scientists and health researchers right now. Earlier this month, the, OMB announced, like, even worse rules about how grants are gonna be judged and allocated. I mean, it's just, like it's, like, bad, bad out here. Um
Absolutely.
but somehow it was such a, um, reaffirmation of the extraordinariness of science and, like, why scientists do what they do, and, it wasn't just this one scientist's breakthrough, but this was, like, 30 to 40 years of research projects that had, like, slowly chipped away at this problem of, like, how do we actually, like, get a medicine to bind to this type of cancer? And to have such a meaningful result for people in terms of, like, having extra time with their loved ones, when they've been
Yeah.
given a terminal cancer diagnosis is just so it's just so tangible, and really beautiful. So, um, express your love to a scientist in your life this week, and also tell the OMB how much you don't like these new proposed rules, please.
Yeah, I hope hopefully you'll have a welcome ear there. But that truly is so awesome. And I mean, I think it just, to your point, just underscores the value, right, of public research and the need to continuously fund it, as opposed to this rise in pseudoscience that we are seeing. That said, Nora, it's an excellent segue, actually. And we did not
Right.
plan this, folks, into my joy of this week, or my 8 ounces of joy, I should say, for this week. Particularly as you had said, um, you know, that medical treatment essentially being able to give folks more time with the people that they love. This week is my birthday, and I am, not to make it all about me, but to make it about me, I guess.
You get to
No,
make it about you this
I,
week.
I, it's I always get very reflective, around my birthday, just in terms of the things that I'm grateful for, the folks that I have in my life, the the things that I get to do, and how much of a privilege that life is, in terms of, people know that I'm not the most religious person, and so I always view life as this peak, through oblivion, if you will, right?
Mhm.
Of that we are the lucky ones who get to live, and part of living is not taking moments for granted, even as
Yeah.
frustrating as life can be at times. And so there's this great line by the author Paul Bowles in his book The Sheltering Sky that I always go back to, and
Mm.
it's just so beautiful. But it starts off this way. It says, death is always on the way, but the fact that you don't know when it will arrive seems to take away from the finiteness of life. It's that terrible precision that we hate so much. But because we don't know, we get to think of life as an inexhaustible well. Yet everything happens a certain number of times, and a very small number, really. How many more times will you remember a certain afternoon of your childhood?
Hmm.
Some afternoon that's so deeply a part of you that you can't even conceive of your life without it. Perhaps 4 or 5 more times? Perhaps not even. How many more times will you watch the full moon rise? Perhaps 20? And yet it all seems so limitless.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. That always just makes me sort of just reflect on, even, these moments now that there's a lot of heaviness and intensity and absurdity and incompetence, like at the highest levels of power in this country. And still yet, to be able to grab on to the things that make this life so worth the living, is it in it itself is a joy. So
Mm.
thank you, to all of our listeners for the gift of your attention when we're doing this podcast, and also just, again, and I know I've thanked both you, Jessica and Nora, in the past, but I continue to can't thank you all enough for, um, making, contributing to a life that continues to be, so enriching, from what we do here at this podcast. So this is it's a it's a great birthday gift, just to be with you today. So yeah.
Ooh, Marcus. Okay. Well, happy birthday to you. And I hope that maybe also, as a birthday gift to you, the number of idiotic things that the Trump administration can do this week is also numbered in the same way that
We can
no,
hope, but I'll say, like, the more immediate gift would be for folks to actually donate to this
fair.
podcast. So
Yes.
yes, and they can easily do so at the
Yeah.
link in the link in the show notes, or and we'll tell you another way to do it in our outro. So there you go. Anyway.
And I guess that's as good a time of as any to sign off. So folks, this conversation with Professor Ross is really what compassionate organizing actually looks like in practice, which after the week we just described feels less like a political strategy and more just like a survival skill.
Yeah, huge thanks again to Professor Ross, bringing the kind of wisdom that makes you not only want to be a better organizer, but be a better human. Though to be honest, we're taking that one day at a time, folks.
Baby steps, Marcus, baby steps.
Indeed, Nora, indeed.
You may be getting wiser with age, but I don't know if I am. Thanks as well to our incomparable producer, Jessica Partnow, who has perfected the skill of gently calling in both Marcus and I whenever we sound like a lawsuit waiting to happen.
Oh, definitely keeps her busy, let me tell you. And our and our music here is from Aham Aluo, who definitely will not be playing in DC next month with honor.
That's right. This kind of talent isn't free. As Marcus mentioned, we do not get cushy Trump administration appointments, and you love us for it, but we need your support. Head over to inthemeanwhilepodcast.com where you can support the show, read our work, and feel briefly good about yourself before doom scrolling resumes.
And if this episode meant something to you, meant anything to you, and if Professor Ross said something that cracks you wide open, please make sure to share it. We've all got a couple of fiery friends who need her advice before they get kicked out of the vegan mutual aid kitchen. Or don't I know it?
You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. New episodes drop every Friday and also air each week on KVRU. Until then, keep calling each other in, even when calling out feels so much more satisfying.
It does indeed. But until then, folks, take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you in the meanwhile.